Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Nealons from the University of Warwick.
I'm Shanine Bethina, I'm the Creative Director for the City of Culture Trust in Coventry.
And I'm Raideen Carter, I'm Exec Producer for the Birmingham 2022 Festival.
And we three are here to talk about the West Midlands Cultural Research Project, think a little bit about some of the key findings, but also the messages that come through. And as I'm sure you know, the research project was made up of two pieces, an economic impact assessment to look at what the cultural sector contributes to the region, but also more importantly, how it might contribute more and might grow. And then a very important piece of audience research, which really broke new ground in thinking about what do we mean by audiences, what do we mean by culture, really trying to move away from the idea that culture is something that only happens in city centre venues, which people are expected to travel to, and that strategies for audiences should be based on how do we get people to come to our show, and really beginning to think differently about that by starting by looking at what makes the population of the West Midlands different from other places and from other regions. And then within the West Midlands, what are the differences? And what the study has been able to do is to show us at neighbourhood level, what the people in that area like, what their preferences are, what their ethnic identities, qualification levels, to give us a much better understanding of what kind of cultural investment we might make that might really work and help those people. And that's in the context, I think, the other important thing the research project did was not just to judge people on how often they went to publicly invested funding. We looked at how often they go to music venues, how often they go to commercial theatres, a much broader view of what participation in culture looks like. We'll never be able to get total cultural participation, but this project took us further than we've ever gone before. And of course, what it shows is that, of course, there's a huge, lively cultural participation going on beyond public culture, publicly invested culture. And one of the key things this report does is to challenge the language that we previously used to describe people in neighbourhoods as low participation, cold spots, cultural deserts, to recognise we are all creative, we are all cultural, and therefore we should be thinking more carefully about how we make sure that public investment in culture benefits everyone, not just some of us. Culture for the many, if you like, rather than the few. So I'm going to turn over to Shanine just to talk about, in terms of a shift in understanding of what culture is, who's it for, how we should be investing in people and places. What does that mean for you?
Thanks, Jonathan. I think really when I arrived in Coventry and kind of we took forward the winning bid for City of Culture, one of the really strong components of that was the fact that through all of the research that had been done in planning for City of Culture, it was evident that everyone wanted to be involved, and that meant that we needed to work with communities, with people all over the city. When I arrived in the city, what I hadn't quite understood is that nobody thought City of Culture was for them. So whilst people want to engage in culture and do engage in culture, it's a very cultural city, actually the notion of a city of culture, people didn't understand it, they didn't understand what it would be, and they felt that it was for someone else. And so a lot of the work we've had to do is really talk to people and think about how do we make sure it's inclusive for everybody? How do we promote greater equity? How do we move outside of the mainstream? How do we think differently about who the artist community is, so that we're really tackling this notion of equity and really embracing everybody's culture, everybody's creativity in the city. And it's a long road, it's a long journey that you have to go on. But once we actually started to have conversations with people about what culture meant to them and how they understood it and what was going on around the city, there's a massive grassroots revolution in Coventry where there's so much going on at that grassroots level. And people just roll up their sleeves and make it happen. We've also got a very ethnically diverse city. Lots of people have moved to Coventry and come to live there for many different reasons. Some of them don't have English as their first language. And so there's lots of kind of elements in our society that we have to understand better in order to make changes, in order to accommodate everybody's culture in our programme. So I think that for me, that was the big learning about kind of understanding how people felt and the kind of historical inequalities that they were dealing with in order to kind of move forward with our City of Culture.
Yeah. And I know, Radine, that the Commonwealth Games is very keen to build on that model. And one thing that your investment has done in the research project is produce this regional place profiler.
Yep.
So you're able to see, again, at neighbourhood level, what kinds of cultural participation, what's different about the population, and really think about how you engage. So how are you carrying this way of thinking through into the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah, well, I think we've benefited slightly in that we're a culture festival within a sporting mega event. So there was lots of research already sitting around sports audiences and general consensus about how much this event was wanted in the city. And actually that perception has changed over time. So the Games, there's a lot of I think every 3 months, there's a sort of sense check, who wants this thing to happen and why. So we came into a space where we understood what audiences for this type of sport mega event got, and they're televised events as well. So there's a populist approach to them anyway. And then I think when we came in, there wasn't a precedence actually before within a Games of a culture festival quite this large in terms of our ambitions. So we knew we needed this research to happen, this type of research that hadn't existed before, and it's certainly in my lifetime, professionally, the most comprehensive view of the landscape that you can just look at. And we were lucky enough, I think, to have our hands and our eyes on this before we'd sort of pushed the button and settled all of our plans, which has been a brilliant gift. I think my background is in children and young people, participation, art centres. So it enabled me actually to take a view on how we curate and programme the festival. Like the region is one big art centre, I think, where you're thinking about multiple venues, inside, outside, and you think audience and participation first. Even though we want this festival to be arts-led, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think this research is really allowing us to do that. We won't get it perfect, we won't get all of it completely right, but I think that it's there now to build on. It means that we can prove, I think, to elements of the culture sector, including ourselves, that you can achieve this when you've got the right statistics and detail behind you, and then we can try to define what needs to happen to make sure the sector keeps using it, because if it just happens once and then it's not developed on, then it will have been a waste of resource and a waste of time.
Well, I want to come back and ask both of you about that building on, keeping the momentum going. But before I do, Janine, Radine has started to talk about it. I mean, one of the challenges in the strategy is about where culture happens, and I know that in both Birmingham and Coventry, been very keen to make sure that's distributed, across neighbourhoods. People don't have to travel for it. It happens where they are, and also challenges around who are the creators. Is it just professionals, or are we all got that opportunity? And I know that you both. So do you just want to talk about how important that distributing the opportunity, distributing where things happen, who creates, who takes part has been?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Coventry we made a decision very early on that we were going to co-create our programme between communities and artists, and that the programme, the narrative, the storytelling around the programme would come from the community, and that we would then go and find artists who could help us to deliver that. And the way that we approached it is we've kind of been working on the ground in communities. We've also been working with charities who are tackling some of the kind of, I suppose, bigger challenges in society of Coventry, to really understand what their objectives and how we work with them and add value to the work they're doing to reach maybe the more vulnerable people in our city. So I think for us it was really kind of understanding kind of who we wanted to work with, and then putting in place this system of talking to people so that we understood what the programs were they wanted to do. And so it's less about distributing and it's more about understanding the stories we want to tell and where they need to happen. We haven't programmed a festival and it's dropped in different parts of the city. We've worked with the community to create the program that they want to see. And by bringing artists into the mix of that, we can develop the ambition, we can develop the quality, we can develop the storytelling, but actually it starts with the community. So if you look at Faith, which is the big project we did recently with the Royal Shakespeare Company, it very much started with our conversation with the faith communities and what they wanted to talk about and how they wanted to present themselves and their role in the community and the role of faith in people's lives. And then the RSC came in to look at how do we do this storytelling, how do we bring this out, who are the writers we need, how do we work with writers from the communities as well as bringing writers in who have made this their career, to really kind of bring them together to tell these stories. And how do we shine a spotlight on the ingredients of for a good life, which is what Faith is all about, really. So I think everything that we've done is about understanding who our local community partners are and then building the programme with them.
So that's a very different model of cultural production, which
Yeah.
runs through the strategy.
Yeah.
And I know, this is very important to you, your 150 or so community projects that you'll be launching and running in quite a tight time period. So, how important are those, and how have you gone about setting them up? What's the ethos of those, Radine?
Well, we know about 40 of them at the minute, so that's great. And we decided that we'd do 2. You're talking about the Creative Communities, Creative City Grants Programme. And we knew right from the start when we were thinking about what the festival should be that we needed a programme where people would, could just elect and apply and say, this is what I want to do. And we knew we needed to do that on a very grassroots level. I think at the same time, we needed to make sure that we weren't separating out what was, a direct award commission. So actually, we just call them all commissions, but the route to achieving those commissions has been slightly different in a number of ways. And again, that was quite purposeful. We'll work out if that was the best way or not, I think, when we get to the end and we start evaluating. But I think our ambition to do that was, one, and this is not to sound too critical, is to know that there is a function within the city of Birmingham in particular where we're running that programme of applying to the council to do your creative activities in your communities. But I think our learning in investigating and finding out more about the history of that was that it hadn't moved very much. So that the ambition, that pool of organisations and groups applying wasn't changing, what they were doing wasn't changing, the amounts of money that they could apply for weren't changing, and we just felt like we needed to change that. So we did, not by huge, just really tiny little shifts actually, and just shifts in perception, which I think is, is a big part of this. And already I think we've seen actually some organisations that would have only applied for, your £10,000 to do something in their very specific community, bring their idea to the table for a direct commission and say, I don't want to go in through a grant programme, I want you to give me money to do this thing over here, thanks very much. And that was brilliant. So it just shook and brought a little bit of, I think, equality across the landscape, which I think for a long time has been publicly funded arts organisations over here, and then non-publicly funded or funded in another way, charities, groups, organisations over here, with not very much in the middle. And I think what we're trying to achieve is to sort of skinny that gap about who, and to try and mix them together a bit more. I'm certainly hoping that's what the Creative City Grants Programme achieves anyway. It's just closing the gap. And Shanine, the work that's happening in Coventry, you can see absolutely is also trying to close that gap that must exist in a different way in Coventry and that part of the region because of the scale of organisations that you've got, like the RSC, through to the belt, So I don't know if that answered the question properly, but...
No, it did. Really interesting. I mean, it's just about whole new ways of thinking about cultural investment. This is a precious resource. And also I think, and I want to come to that to move to the how do we build on, let us hope that Coventry City of Culture was the first and the last City of Culture to be held in a global pandemic. And of course, you're just coming out of that as well. The world has changed, the cultural sector's changed, and in a sense what you're talking about is reflecting all of those changes. And what I'm hearing is it's really about culture with the people rather than for the people, culture with and by the people rather than culture for the people. Now you've been able to do that in these two cities, Birmingham and Coventry. But what are the ripple effects going to be across the region? And also, how do we make sure that the region stays ahead and that this model really takes root and kind of grows. And we've got any thoughts about that, Shanine?
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to pick up on the investment piece, because I think, I agree with Radine. It's we put out a lot of calls for people to respond to grant opportunities, and we were just getting the same people applying for them and not reaching into the communities that we wanted to be supporting. And so we've had to think really differently about that and be quite flexible and be able to change our processes and systems as we go along, as well as going into communities and creating programs with them, which we're then funding. So again, it's kind of putting different models in place so that different communities can benefit in different ways. I think we can't underestimate how hard it is to apply for money, and if English isn't your first language, and if writing isn't a great strength, and if you're not strategic in your thinking, it can be very hard to put your idea forward. And so, we've really tried to address that in finding different ways to invest. So I think I'm absolutely with Radine on that we have to really understand that the models we've been using in the past, they're just not right anymore. No. They don't work for the communities that we now have, who are desperate to be engaged in creativity and culture, but they're just finding it too challenging to access the small amounts of funding that exist.
Well, we created this new model in the two centres, not the only two centres, but in two central places within the West Midlands because of the opportunities that have been there. So how do we make sure that the region benefits from the approaches and the thinking you're talking about? And more importantly, how do we make sure that it doesn't disappear with the end of the Commonwealth Games in City? This really takes root as the way the West Midlands does cultural investment, cultural making.
From our perspective, I think what we will have achieved by the end of the City of Culture programme, which will have been a 4-year process in terms of the work we've actively been doing since we won the title, is investing in people. So we've invested a huge amount of time, money, love, support in bringing through cultural leaders, community leaders, new talent, building their confidence, supporting their creativity, helping them have faith in their creativity and their ideas, and building their connections. One of the things that I first encountered when I arrived in Coventry was meeting different cultural communities in the city, and the need for them to build their confidence within their community before they could start working across other communities. And I think we got to that point through the pandemic because we had to work in that way anyway.
And you're confident
and
those have been lasting.
So that confidence was really built because we were going into those different communities and working with them in a very focused way, but a different way, because obviously we weren't live in a space with them. But then what we've been able to do since we've kind of started to open up a bit is start bringing those communities together. And what I'm starting to see, which makes me feel so proud about what our team is achieving, is there's a project with a group of people who worked on Coventry Welcomes, who are mainly people who have come to the city as a refugee or as an asylum seeker. They've worked on this great project. They're now involved in the walk, which we're doing with Good Chance Theatre in October, and they're starting to think about what other projects they want to get involved in. So great. It's opened up it's built their confidence, it's created an appetite for people, and I suppose it's changed the rules of engagement. Which I think is really important, because when I arrived, the rules of engagement were very much weighed heavily in terms of those funded arts organisations and the people that have the loudest voices and the most privilege. And we've really tried to address that equity. And I'm not saying it's perfect, and there's still a long journey to go on. But I think in terms of legacy, it's those people who take that forward. And our 15 cultural leaders in the city, they are absolutely embroiled in this and embedded in this and up for the challenge of moving this forward. And even the work we've done with the Belgrade Theatre, we've changed the leadership there and invested in younger, more diverse leadership in order to think about, what is the role of a civic theatre in the 21st century? What are they supposed to be doing? Who are they supposed to be connecting with? Where are they supposed to be creating their work, and who with, and how? So I think they will have gone on that journey as well. And the same with the Herbert Gallery, you know, one of our other big funded organisations, that they're working with the Turner Prize, which is now 5 collectors of artists, 100 artists working on the Turner Prize. They've never worked in that way before, and it's going to really radically change the way in which they think about audience and participation and artist, and the blurring of the boundaries between the three.
I mean, you're both very excited by your projects, and I'm very interested in them. But I want to get to if I'm watching, listening to this in Stoke or Nuneaton or Bedworth or South Warwickshire, I might be thinking, well, that's great for Coventry and Birmingham. What does it mean for the rest of us? You know, is it about this investment in people? Is it, you know, what is it that can benefit the whole? The way of thinking, the way of approaching, absolutely can. But is there anything else that we can benefit from without the significant investments that you guys have had?
Yeah, I think I agree totally. The legacy is in the people, and I think it's always, there's a huge pressure on the mega events we're talking about to do legacy. You know, people want to know about legacy before they know what the thing is.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. You must have got that in City Culture. We definitely got it. You have to sort of paint out your legacy plan.
Thanks to us, I think.
Yeah, before you've actually painted out what you think you're going to do and why you're going to do it. And I think that, I can see why, but I think some of that needs to stop. And I think we certainly benefited a little bit more out of, God, it sounds a bit grotesque, but it benefited a little bit because we were still planning through COVID. And I think what that did was allow people to stop short of these huge, you know, pressures on 25-year legacies that would have happened out of 2012 Olympics, for example. People were thinking way into the future and actually just realised that we just need to get over the next 2 years. And so we could actually start narrowing that down a little bit. So people is one, and I think also then trying to explain that you can't force those long-term changes to happen just because we think so, because life happens, as the last 18 months has proven. And the people involved, communities in the broadest sense of word, people need time to work out what it means for them actually once these things are happening around them, if they've never experienced these things before in such a big way.